Hey there guys, so I'm going to do a short video on squats and knee pain. Like everyone, for me, technique makes a massive difference. So not so long ago I did the front squat every day. I was front squatting 20 reps in a single set, and I was literally doing that every day. And what I found was if my technique got away from me, I ended up getting injured. So I wouldn't really say like injured badly, but my knees ended up not liking me. So if I was to drop down quick, I found catching the spring out the base of the squat made the squat easier, but my knees didn't like, being or squatting in that fashion. For me, if I was to take my time, descend, I wouldn't say slowly, but just at a normal pace, just not, trying to drop down real quick, it made a massive difference. Knees out when you're squatting, so just pressing them out to the side, squatting down with control, not letting your knees cave in, especially on, the up phase. If your knees aren't caving in, makes a big difference. And it also means, you can hold the tension a lot better in your hips and quads. And, not necessarily using the knee joint to try and slingshot past a sticking point from the base. Knees behind toes. For me, that sort of holds true for a lot of individuals. If you've got healthy knees, it may not be an issue. My knees, they're fine, but at the same time, I don't want to do front squats with a very narrow stance and let my knees, track far over my toes, because it just doesn't like it if I do that for quite a few sessions. So for me, especially when I'm doing normal traditional squats as opposed to front squats, I'll try and take a wider stance, press my knees out to the side, squat down, keeping my chest up, because, if my chest caves forward, then my lower back has to pick up a lot of slack, and then sometimes, the rest of your form breaks down, then your knees end up trying to do weird things that they're not meant to do. So for me, yeah, taking a wider stance, pressing my knees out, squatting with control made a big difference. I never have any knee pain doing that. If you find taking the wider stance is taking, the pressure off your knees and it feels a lot better, you might think of doing something like a belt squat as well. You can squat a lot more upright simply because the weight's sitting on your hips, and, you can grab onto the handles of the machine, or, you can keep your chest up a lot easier. You'll find it's very, very easy to keep your knees behind your toes, which therefore limits the amount of force going through the front of your knee. And that can be a very useful training tool, especially if you have competition and you don't want your squat to drop. You might do 1 or 2 sets of squats, maintain your numbers, but then do the rest of the work on the belt squat. That's another way of, still growing mass in your quads and the rest of it, but limiting, the amount of volume that's aggravating your knees. Speaking of volume, look at the amount of, front squats, traditional squats, whatever else you're doing in your training program, and, have an honest assessment and see if the volume is, manageable as opposed to being, really, really high volume. Just like anything, if you were to bench press every day, your shoulders probably wouldn't like you. So don't sort of expect your knees to like you much if you're going to be squatting, high rep every day. With that being said, there's certain exercises that I avoid, being like the leg extension. My knees don't like that one, and hack squats. They've never felt comfortable, so I just stay away from those movements. Belt squats, as I touched on earlier, I found they work really well. I can play around with my foot stance, take a really wide foot stance. I can take a very narrow foot stance and sit really far backwards and still keep my knees, my knees behind my toes. But I have to literally lean backwards, and the only way I can do that is using, the belt squat. I wouldn't be able to do that as a traditional front squat. So take advantage of the machines, that you have available for training. Knee wraps, they have their place for me. For heavy singles, I always, wrap my knees. I find I get a lot of stability, and it helps with my squat. The knee wraps also, in a way, act as a additional pair of quadriceps just because of how they pull with the material. And some people will find that because the knee wraps are so tight, it's very hard to break forward with your knees to initiate the squat. So you literally have to squat with your hips coming back a lot more. So in a way, it corrects the form. But at the same time, if you become too reliant on knee wraps, it's not a great thing either. I don't really like the idea of doing heaps of sets and reps with my knees wrapped. I just don't want all the additional compression on the patella tendon / ligament. It's just not something that, I want to get in the habit of. And then, for recovery, if it's been a particularly heavy training session, your knees don't feel quite right, maybe consider icing them, bring down the inflammation. For me, I'd only use ice for the first 48 hours or so, because you reduce the blood flow. If there was any damage, you're still going to get those minor little clots within, the tissue where it's been sort of damaged. So you can kickstart the healing process simply by reducing the amount of swelling. Reducing swelling in itself doesn't necessarily mean that you're recovering, but at the same time, if there's a lot less, fluids escaping, blood escaping into surrounding tissue, makes the cleanup for your body a hell of a lot easier. So, that's what I try and keep in mind. The other thing is after the first 48 hours, I'd then use the heat pack to warm the joint up and get blood flow, because the quicker you can reduce, your swelling and inflammation, the faster you can get total recovery started. And for me, that just involves taking the joint through its full range of motion. That being said, if I hurt my knee, I'd put ice on the front of my knee, but, further up on the quad, I'd apply heat because I want the muscle to relax, which is going to take tension off the front of the knee because the tendon / ligament isn't being pulled as tight. So there's a few things to it, and if you've tried all the above and your knees still don't like you, probably go see someone like a sports doctor and get an assessment of what your knee's actually doing and why it's in the state that it is. You may have other muscular imbalances. Your lateralis might be ridiculously tight, and you might have patella maltracking. There could be a whole host of other issues, but if you find, squatting with proper form, pushing your knees out to the side and keeping them there on the ascent and descent makes a big difference, and that's great. Maybe then, move to the belt squat for a while, continue to work on, your form and technique with, say, a lighter weight, but using the belt squat to, use a heavier load while keeping your chest up and your knees well and truly behind your toes. That could be quite a viable option, so you can still continue to build your squat. So that's my take on things. If you guys have any questions, feel free to comment below. If you guys haven't already, hit like and subscribe. Have a great day wherever you are.